wonderful gifts that this Constitution has given the state of Montana, which is the right to a clean and healthful environment. And I'm happy to be here for a lot of reasons. One of which is I can't help but revel in the irony of my standing at the very podium where so many speakers who used to hold me in such disdain when I worked for state government stood, that I really love being here right now. So this is just marvelous. So before we begin, I've got a couple of thank yous to hand out to roughly 81 men and 19 women who crafted a document that I think has served Montana so incredibly well over the past 50 years, and certainly, hopefully, will continue to do so for the next 50 years and beyond. So these 100 folks were replacing what was at the time an 83-year-old Constitution that was drafted, as I understand it, rather hastily as a requirement for statehood in 1989, largely by and certainly for the benefit of the Copper Kings who were running the state back then and continued to do so for many years afterwards. So the new Constitution, it was really a game changer for the state of Montana, as we've been hearing for the last day and a half. It changed a lot of things. There was a panel yesterday that talked about a lot of these things, but it allowed Montana citizens finally to weigh in on government decisions before those decisions were made. It largely opened up what had formerly been closed-door government meetings. It allowed citizens, it allowed the press to examine state government documents. It gave, it said that the rights of individuals in Montana, Montana citizens, cannot be infringed upon. And of course, it did what we're here to talk about in this panel. It granted us the right to a clean and healthful environment, and it bestowed on the citizens and the government the responsibility of trying to achieve that. So at the time in 1972, Montana was only the second state in the country to have a clean and healthful provision included in its Constitution. And as I understand it, right now there are still only 5 states that have that provision in their respective constitutions. So what that means is that was at the time and continues to be a very big deal. That's a technical term, big deal. I think you all probably can understand that one. So the question arises is, you know, what's been the impact of that provision in the state of Montana? Has it helped us? And it's not quite as simple a question as you might think, and the answer, it doesn't lend itself to necessarily a simple answer. But I will say that emissions of the 6 most common serious air pollutants have fallen by 75% roughly in the last 50 years. Obviously a good thing. The Clark Fork River used to run red all the way to Missoula because of acid mine drainage 50 years ago. It no longer does that. Montana has 16 priority cleanup sites that are listed in the federal Superfund program that are obviously seriously toxic sites. That's not very many when you think of the fact that there's over 1,300 around the country. We only have 16 of them currently. But we have the distinction, of course, of having the nation's largest Superfund site in the Butte-Clark Fork complex and the nation's most deadly Superfund site associated with the W.R. Grace mine in Libby that's killed thousands of people around the world with the asbestos from it. But one thing I did notice when I was looking at the history of some of these sites, all of those activities began before the Constitution was ratified. So in other words, we're not currently creating more Superfund sites that we know about. That's a good thing. So does that mean Montana deserves a clean bill of health environmentally? Absolutely not. We're not nearly where we want to be, where we need to be. And it doesn't mean that the Constitution was solely responsible for the improvements in the excuse me, in the environment that we've seen in Montana over the last 50 years. Lots of other factors have contributed to the reduction in emissions, cleaning up our rivers, et cetera. But as we'll hear from some of our speakers, the one thing we can say for sure the Constitution has done, and this provision of the Constitution has done, it's inspired generations of Montanans to protect, to fight for, to uphold the health, the beauty of our environment in Montana that we all love so much. So it has been an inspiration. So it's taken decades to flesh out what clean and healthful environment really means to Montana. We're still in that process in some ways. So here's what I see as the process, and it's greatly simplified for me because I have a hard time understanding the complexities of some of the things they talked about in that last wonderful panel. But here's the way I see the process after the Constitution is developed. First, we have the legislature that develops the laws, the environmental laws that fall within the framework of the Constitution. The second thing that happens is we have the executive branch of the government, the state agencies, develop the rules and regulations that allow the state to fairly implement the laws that are passed by the legislature. The third part of the process is the judicial branch of government develops case law over time that keeps the legislation and its implementation within the constitutional and legal boundaries. And there's never any tension there, by the way, between any of those, as we heard last time. And finally, we have businesses within the state of Montana that have to figure out a way to operate within this framework that's been developed over time. And so, as luck would have it, we have a panelist to address each of those four parts of the process that I just outlined. And they're going to say a lot more than that too, but there's, that's how the panel was constructed. So I'm going to give very brief introductions. I could spend the rest of the panel touting the accomplishments of these fine four people that surround me here, but I'm going to give very brief introductions now, and then I will turn the panel over to them. So our first presenter, Dorothy Bradley, I think knows everybody in this room and way beyond that. She's been an integral part of Montana's political system for many, many years. I'm not putting a number on that, Dorothy. But I will give some numbers here in a second because Dorothy served in 8 sessions of the legislature beginning in 1971 when she was 23 years old. Now you can do the math. And she was, at the time, the only woman in the legislature, as I understand it, in the House. So pretty groundbreaking stuff that Dorothy was responsible for. She's known for her work on tax reform, natural resources, and business development, economic development. So Dorothy also has the distinction in having served in the very first legislative session following the adoption of the 1972 Constitution. So she has a lot of history with this subject. So our second speaker is Chris Dorrington. And Chris is a man whom I believe has the absolute best job in the world. I say that because I had his position a decade ago. And he is the director of the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. Did I say that right? Yeah. Good. That would have been embarrassing if I got the name of the agency wrong. Chris is going to talk to us about the department's role in implementing some of the environmental legislation passed by the legislature. And looking forward to hearing what he has to say is with all the panelists. Tom France, to my right, who currently serves in the legislature, was the director of the National Wildlife Federation's Northern Rockies, Prairies, and Pacific Regional Center. Interestingly, he was also the lead counsel in MEIC versus the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, which was the first case to interpret a constitutional guarantee to a clean and healthful environment, a very important case that thankfully preceded my tenure. I'm sure you sued me a few times when I was there, though, but anyway. That's water under the bridge, no doubt. So finally, we have Heather Grahame, my friend Heather Grahame here, who is General Counsel and Vice President of Northwestern Energy. And Heather is going to talk to us about the joys of operating a large and complex business under Montana's constitutional, legal, and regulatory system. And with that, again, I thank you all for being here. We're going to try to keep the panel presentations, individual presentations, to 10, maybe 12 minutes at the most, so we reserve some time for questions. But thank you again, and with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dorothy.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I am so glad I'm here. What an incredible day and a half so far, and still more to come. Our worthy leader, May Nan, wanted to be sure we gave a mention to water. And I'm glad to have the honors to start off with a little bit about water. Water, the coin of the realm. Whenever I talk about water or think about water, I always start thinking about my father, who, when I was just a kid, and he was a scientist, wrote an article that was submitted to Science and published, and he estimated in 1959 that water would be the first natural resource we ran short on due to population growth and everything else that was going on, to such an extent that it would impact our standard of living by the year 2000. Now I look back and I think, good estimate, Dad. So water, yeah, the coin of the realm, and it always will be. I have much of the glory of the 70s, what we who were there, lucky enough to be there, called the glory days, was due to good timing. I've always thought it was when the stars lined up. And when it comes to water, a lot of the extraordinary stars were the most visionary people that you could imagine. There was a lot of amazing leadership advancing. We in the legislature and the Constitution. In the 60s, Jim Posowitz, that so many of you are aware of, who gave 70 years of his professional life to water and wildlife, came up with a term in the late 60s of a blue ribbon stream, which was used to describe the best of Montana's trout waters. We hear that bandied about every day by a multitude, and I wonder if they ever knew that that term had an origin. It did. And then came an extraordinary representative, I think he was from Kalispell, who wanted to make sure those beautiful trout waters had in-stream flows and a way to enable them. They are in the law called Murphy rights. So here comes the Constitution, does about 3 things. Confirms existing water rights. It establishes water as the property of the state to be used beneficially by its people. And then it said the legislature shall provide for the administration and centralized records. You heard a little discussion yesterday about where the opposition to the Constitution came from. I think that state involvement rang their bell. And I do remember a lot of activity from the Farm Bureau. In fact, I remember one time listening as we came to the end of the discussion of the Constitution, and we were waiting for the vote. I was sitting next to Dorothy, Delegate Dorothy Eck, and the Farm Bureau was giving out some information. I leaned over and said, "I don't think that's accurate. Do we need to say something?" And she said, "Shh, we have the votes." Good piece of advice for life. Dorothy Eck, who was a mentor of so many of us, had what I always call the Dorothy Eck rule. Nothing's going to happen if everyone isn't involved. Yeah. So here comes the Water Use Act, and it is the most important water milepost in the state of Montana water law. But I'm going to tell you there was a lot of percolating of interest in the bad state of water prior to the Constitution. It was kind of coming up to the surface in parallel evolution as we are setting into motion the Constitutional Convention. At the end of 1971, Gary Wicks, I was hoping he'd be here, but brazen and brilliant Gary Wicks, who was the first director after reorganization as the Director of Natural Resources, went to his boss, Forrest Anderson, and he said, the condition of Montana water laws is absolutely appalling. Now, if you know Gary, you know it was in a lot more colorful language than that. He said, but there is nothing to limit, to prevent, or even record the use of water. All you have to do is start using it and you're off and running. He said, we have to do something about that. And his boss, Governor Anderson, I can just imagine him looking at Gary and saying, have at it, Gary. I mean, what wilder issue could you pick? But Gary was pretty good, and he put together a committee of some of the greats. I just have to give a few names: Ted Doney, Al Stone, Ron Richards. And by the end of 1972, when the Constitution was moving forward, they had run all over the state with their proposal. They'd gotten a lot of support. They were ready to advance it. And then he put together a coalition of sponsors of the most amazing, diverse legislators on the planet. And they got it through. It just reminds me, as I look back on that piece of history, that a coalition of diverse and bipartisan sponsors was the name of the game. That was the trick to getting something through. You didn't have to have 51% or a supermajority in that chamber of legislation in order to take a baby step forward. You had a coalition. So at the end of the 70s, we have this array of things. We have a central database. That sounds kind of bland, but in that time, our water rights were pretty much on index cards in shoe boxes in county courthouses. And suddenly everybody knew, particularly with the publication of the North Central Power Study, this is not going to do the trick when these downstream states start making their claims on Montana water. We developed a system for appropriating new rights, amazing innovations like water reservations, so far-sighted, where you could reserve water for future use, for people, and for wildlife and fish. It laid all the groundwork for Governor Judge's 3-year water moratorium, where on major water appropriations, giving us a little bit of time to get our house in order. And then there was the 1979 Act setting up the water court. I was from Gallatin, and there was curmudgeon Judge Leslie, and he'd be the first to say he was a curmudgeon. And he said, oh, I'll get her done in 5 years, and the water court will be in Bozeman. That's how things got done. And an unbelievable capstone to all of this in the 70s is the Reserved Water Right Compact Commission, where we committed ourselves to resolving water rights of the state and Indian nations by conversation and reasoning instead of litigation. I wish Susan Cottingham was here. We got her done. It's just simply amazing, but it's been wrapped up fairly recently. So thanks to a lot of short sentences in the Constitution, Article 9, Section 3, we have this stunning achievement in Montana where we gave the state the tools to protect the existing users and address future needs of humans and fish and wildlife. But I'm going to say the state of water law in Montana is in huge disarray. There is so much that needs to be done. It is not my job to tell you that today, but I recommend to everybody the newly released Montana Water Law, unbelievable manual put together by water law professor Michelle Bryan and water judges Russ McEllier and Steve Brown. It is so well written, you can sit down and read it cover to cover. And everybody should, because water has always been the coin of the realm. How am I doing?
Great, we've got 8.5 minutes.
Oh, yeah. I have all the time in the world. So all that said, we had this eruption of activity in the 70s, and it went way beyond water. Some of it was implementing the Constitution. Sometimes I like to think it was buying into the poetry of the preamble. And sometimes I think we're all just breathing the same air then. It all just moved. A couple of years ago, someone came up and asked me, "What's the Coal Trust?" I was just aghast, like, you don't know what the Coal Trust is? So it made me take to heart that our so-called glory days are now history. But I have thought at that time, it's history worth preserving, because it's a time when the politicians and the activists and even the delegates, whom we all think are gods and goddesses, were all ordinary Montanans who found ourselves in a position to matter, and we rose to the occasion. I couldn't believe my good fortune when I started thinking about this bigger picture of rounding up 20 of the participants and activists of that era, and I was able to collect their stories in their own words, a little bit of editing here. This book is available as a law review thanks to Professor Michelle Bryan. You can get it outside the House chamber if you want the personal stories. The stories just came pouring forth about all the activities, this huge array of activities that were done in the 70s. I had to tell a quick favorite of mine, which deals with conservative Republican businessman from Billings, Harrison Fagg, the architect. And I wanted to footnote this story because I just heard 2 days ago from Evan Barrett that Harrison and his wife Susan were the last people to be dragged off the flooding Stillwater River out of their cabin on that river and hauled to safety. And I thought, that's Harrison. But I was so glad to know he still has a cabin on the Stillwater River, because back in the 70s, when he endeavored and failed to pass a Montana Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, some aggravated neighbor burned down his cabin. But evidently he rebuilt it, and he still goes there, and he's a phenomenal person. 3 minutes?
Last story.
Oh, last story. Okay, he means I better hurry up. Okay, well, let's just say there wouldn't have been a Hard Rock Reclamation Act without Harrison. He found they were digging up a high meadow below his beloved Beartooth. He reeled it. He said, I'm gonna make a law. His colleague said, we need a 2-year study, and Harrison said, we need this now. And he pulled in a lawyer from the National Mining Association and an Environmental Association. He stuck him in his law office, and he said, I'll bring you food. Don't come out until you have a draft. Okay, I'm just gonna wind up. I love my stories, but
We do too.
Okay, quick. As remarkable as these stories are, I just want to say what is even more remarkable is what you read between the lines. Because at that point, crusading for Montana was not rude, it was not partisan, it was not personal. It's because everybody believed, as hard fought as these laws were, and they were hard fought, it's at the base of it, there was not a clashing of values, because we are all connected to the land, and we all wanted to pass on our beautiful piece of the planet to the next generation. I keep thinking it's time that we go on from there, and that is a good place to start, but we better do it now.
Good morning. My name is Chris Dorrington. I'm the director at the Department of Environmental Quality, and I get the pleasure of following Dorothy. Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. At the very best of what I do, I find myself honored and very humbled by being a part of a whole constituency of leaders and citizens in Montana that greatly appreciate what we do. And in some of my darker days, I'm reminded of lyrics in the song written and sung by Steeler's Wheel, Stuck in the Middle with You. We are, as Richard had said, the implementers of law. And by gosh, we participate in the session to the best of our ability to steer and to cajole at times also law that benefits the state and adheres to the constitutional provision for a clean and healthful environment. We are the protectors, and our environment is no different. We are the protectors of our air, land, and water. And I'm certain Richard remembers many a day in which he had to tell a whole constituency no. And we're of the same, we're of the similar breed, and where we stand in the gap between those who want something and those who don't, it's a complicated position. Many have asked, what do you do for those who don't understand what a director does? I sometimes pause and think, what should I say? Because on any given day, including today, in which we're trying to protect the state from the ravages of flood and communities who have safe and potable drinking water, I'm still standing today to address a wonderful group of people who care about our environment and the provision written long ago by visionaries and wise leaders to say, have you considered? And I think that's probably my most consistent answer, is we stand in the gap and we are driven to consider. Consider what we must do in implementing laws of our state and those of the nation, really, where we have federal primacy, and we are the ones who implement federal law in the state through agreement. One of our greatest responsibilities is to involve, through the Montana Environmental Policy Act, is to involve citizens and stakeholders in a very open and transparent public involvement process, whereby those who have an interest in what is happening in their community or next to their home or in their state have a voice. And often those, what transpires from those dialogues is very contentious, and sometimes it's very agreeable. I like the latter, but it isn't often that the case. And where from 1972 to where we stand today in 2022, where we have great development and our state is facing and communities are facing those who want to live here too, but they want a home in a subdivision, and they want a public water supply and a wastewater system, all of which most people take for granted. They turn the faucet on and the water works, and they get to put a cup under there and everything works just fine. They get to drink it, and they flush the toilet, and what goes down is never seen again. But what we must do, and I say this in tongue-in-cheek, but it is in reality, is that the neighbor doesn't drink their water, their other neighbor's wastewater. And that sounds really silly and yet really simple, and yet we must protect the waters of the state. Where we do so, I'll give an example from the 2021 session, Senate Bill 358, which many of you may know about and some that don't will be affected by, is a change in our numeric nutrient standard to a narrative standard to protect the waters of the state, but to allow an adaptive management process to take place. And it's a repeal of the numeric standard, which some have said, you're backsliding. And the only thing I can say is I have 400-ish dedicated professionals in my agency that take their job very seriously. They come to work every day not wanting to be the person who is deemed to have backslidden, if that's a word. Yep, it is now. But what I would say is communities and industry came forward with a bill that said repeal the numeric standard, and we want something that we can achieve. And we don't want for a second to have degraded the waters. Thus, Senate Bill 358 is passed, and it says, the DEQ shall, and we must pass a narrative standard approvable by our federal partner, the US EPA, a set of rules and standards, and then reflective in permits, that which protects the waters of the state and is achievable. And it's complicated. Man, that is not a simple process. So we're 13 months into a process by which then the US EPA sends a letter about 3 weeks ago and says, and they followed up in conversation, that says most of what you've written, actually they said all of what you've written or proposed so far is not approvable. And then we are back to principle and rewriting. And the principle is the Montana Constitution, which is a clean and healthful environment, and it is a protection of beneficial uses. And boy, is that complicated. Because the interest and the advocacy varies and drives us. It's loud. Don't do this and please do this. Don't do this and please do this. And those, most of the time, are in opposition. What is not in opposition is our steadfast resolve to not degrade the waters of the state. And through what we must do in Senate Bill 358 and what transpires in 2023, I'll go back to my prior comment of seeking to steer and probably cajoling that of a positive direction to protect our state and that of the future. I think of, as I walk in my building, there's the Lee Metcalf building, there's a bust of a gentleman who fought for decades to do great things. I don't necessarily want a bust of me in any building in the future, but I want to have been known as a staunch leader that defended my constitutional provision. Having said that, I'll poke a bit. The legislative process is not perfect, and everyone knows that. If you look back over the course of time, you see councils that have been developed or appointed, or you see committees that have labored for days over things that, as you look back, you think, how trivial, and yet it wasn't at the time. And we'll continue to do that, and we'll continue to pour ourselves into issues that really matter, and hope that through the most complex research you can do, I believe, is to discover the intent of legislation. So you pour over dialogue of what happened in the past to get to arrive to today of unforeseen and unforeseeable situations in which you have a Bozeman that didn't even exist, or a Bozeman that had a 19th Avenue that wasn't 6 lanes. Those laws have to apply to those situations and protect the Gallatin. So I poke a bit at that process that's complex and often agenda-driven that we must then implement, and then cometh the judiciary. And oh, what a weight to be litigated on a consistent basis. People litigate and have the right to litigate, and it is very much the right of those who bring litigation to defend their stake. But it is a weight, I tell you. On the scientists and engineers, and we think attorneys' job is to defend, and it is. The scientists and engineers that are dedicated to permitting or dedicated to inspection or dedicated to compliance, all of them must also then again spend time creating deposition material. And I think we're weary. I know we are. And it's not to degrade or to remove rights by any party, but it is to make you aware that it is a difficult place to be. And I take it seriously, and I'm very honored and again humbled to be the director, and I hope to advance our agencies. People say, and I'll close here, Richard, people say, what do you want to have accomplished at the end of your stead? Because mine is almost definite, right? I don't have an environmental agenda. What I want is for us to have been clear and consistent and well communicate what we do, so that anyone who is affected by our decision-making has an opportunity to both be protected and also have a voice in the outcome. And I hope that after the course of my career here in this position, that I can at least have set an organization on its feet that surpasses me, and when I'm gone, they can continue on with the good work and adhere to the constitutional provision that wise leaders once put in place. Thank you much.
Good morning, and it's really a great pleasure to be here. It's wonderful to see many old friends and to talk about something, the Montana Constitution, that for I think everyone in this room over a certain age, recognizes as one of the really seminal events in our personal history as well as in Montana's history. And I have had the pleasure of carrying the torch that the delegates put into the Constitution for a clean and healthful environment as an advocate for the National Wildlife Federation and a leader in the state's conservation community. And as an attorney, I have litigated its provisions. But 50 years in, I think we can still look to Article 2 and Article 9, where the right and duty to a clean and healthful environment exist in the Constitution, as something that's more aspirational than concrete. Over the last 50 years, there have been just 2 court cases that have really interpreted the Constitution, the guarantee to a clean and healthful environment, in a big way. While both of those cases are important, across the breadth and depth of the conservation debate that goes on daily in Montana, they have not dramatically changed our lives, but that bedrock principle that a clean and healthful environment is in the Constitution is something that most Montanans are aware of, most Montanans are proud of. Dorothy and Chris both spoke to values. I think most Montanans hold the value of a clean and healthful environment as something that is part of them and that they're very proud of. And as an aspiration for our state, as a goal for our state, that part of the Constitution continues to be very vital, even while the exact contours of what we mean by a clean and healthful environment remain, as Delegate Ellingson recognized in the constitutional debates, something that are a little elusive in terms of very hard definitions. And they are shaped by the facts and the issues of the moment, by the legal policies of the moment, but they guide us. And they give us something, a lodestar to look forward to. I think it's important to recognize that the delegates emphasize the clean and healthful environment, as the courts have recognized, by putting that provision in 2 parts of the Constitution. Article 9, which establishes for state government and all of us as individuals a duty to protect our clean and healthful environment. And Article 2, which creates a right in every individual in Montana to that clean and healthful environment. When I got up to put my coat on today, I said, well, what should I wear? And I got a sports coat out that I have my LGBTQ pin, my gay pride pin on, that I was given during the last legislative session. And I'm proud of the pin. I'm proud of the work I've done on protecting individual rights to privacy. I think it's very important to recognize that those rights are co-equal to our right to a clean and healthful environment, and that threatening those rights threatens the whole gamut of rights that are in the Constitution, and that we need to work to ensure that all of those rights are given effect by the courts, because strengthening one strengthens them all. And that's, I guess, where I would start with the litigation part of this talk. In the mid-1990s, Montana was there were many proposals to develop large gold mines in the state. There was new technology that allowed the mining industry to access very low-grade gold ore bodies. And there was a big proposal to put a huge mine in the upper reaches of the Blackfoot River. And I think most of the people in this audience probably remember the 7-Up Pete fight that went on for a decade. Many younger Montanans drive up and down the Blackfoot, fish the Blackfoot, revel in the beauty of the Blackfoot, and probably have no knowledge of that fight, but it was fierce. And I was working with the Montana Environmental Information Center and several other groups, and we, really our strategy to stop this mine was finding any handhold we could to litigate, to challenge, to raise the issues that the mine posed for the health of the Blackfoot River drainage. And so we filed a suit against the exploration activities of the 7-Up Pete Company. And when we first brought the case, we didn't see it as a great constitutional challenge. But as we researched how we were going to bring it before the court, we looked at the case law interpreting the other parts of our Declaration of Rights, including our right to liberty and our right to make a gainful living. And it was in those areas that the Montana Supreme Court had decided that those were fundamental rights, that constitutional guarantee created something that the state courts had to vigorously enforce, and for those other rights, the court had articulated a standard that it would strictly scrutinize any enactment of the legislature that impinged on those rights. And it was with those case holdings that looked at other parts of Article 2 that we said, we have a constitutional case here. And we brought, the gravamen of our suit was that the legislature had passed a statute that exempted entirely certain activities from going through non-degradation review for water quality impacts. And as Dorothy Bradley eloquently told us, water is the lodestar of Montana, and bringing that case and saying to the Supreme Court that the legislature can do a lot of things, but it cannot unilaterally exempt certain activities that will impact high-quality waters from going through a non-degradation review. And the Supreme Court took the precedent that came from State v. Wadsworth and other cases that had nothing to do with the environment, and through that precedent established that they would use the same standard for challenges with the Montana State Constitution's clean and healthful environment provisions. And so, again, I think it's important to recognize that all of our rights are important, and they mutually reinforce the rights that Montanans have, whether it be to privacy, whether it be to a clean and healthful environment, whether it be to pursue life's liberty in pursuit of happiness. The second case that came out of the Montana Clean and Healthful Environment provision happened just a couple of years ago. And so over 50 years, we had a case in the 90s, and we had a case in the 20s. There have been a few other cases that have been relatively minor. But in Park County Environmental Council versus DEQ, the target agency, the court held that the environmental review that DEQ had performed was inadequate, but then was confronted with a statute that the legislature had passed that said the only remedy was to go back to the agency and have them redo the environmental analysis. And the court said that's not good enough under our Montana Constitution where these environmental issues are implicated. And the court held that as unconstitutional and said we're going to enjoin these exploration activities in the Paradise Valley until the analysis is done. And so those are really the two cases. One case says we're going to strictly scrutinize state actions that impact the citizens' right to a clean and healthful environment. And where those activities do impact that right, we're going to insist that there be an adequate remedy. And that remedy, in many, many instances for environmental cases, is injunctive relief. And I think those are important cases, but they're narrow, they're tailored to certain very specific fact situations. And I think the more important lesson of our clean and healthful environment provision is how it has energized the conservation community and the larger Montana public in protecting and enhancing our environment. And Richard certainly was right when he said we have reduced toxic pollution. We have cleaned up the Clark Fork River, and many, many other water bodies. And those haven't come from just the Constitution. They've come from agencies trying to apply state laws. They've come from citizens trying to enforce those laws, from collaborative groups meeting in bars and back rooms and isolated schoolrooms across Montana saying, how do we do this? How can we move forward in ways that provide us with an ability to make a living and at the same time protect those environmental values that are enshrined in the Constitution? And I really think it's important to look at the evolution of the conservation and environmental communities in Montana over these 50 years, where because of, in part, the Constitution's enshrinement of our clean and healthful environment, we have collectively been energized to find ways forward. And some of that has been litigation, no doubt about it. Some of it has been hard-fought battles in the legislature, and I was witness to a few of those in the 2021 session. We clashed over wolf management. We clashed over water quality. Those were hard fights, and I actually came out on the wrong end, in my opinion, on both of those. But importantly, I think the state has, over the last 50 years, developed other tools that are moving us and are in very meaningful ways to protect our health and environment. Collaboration has really become a tool of choice for many of our conservation groups. Across the state, we have put millions of acres into conservation easements that will protect environmental and wildlife values out through perpetuity. We have vigorous conversations going on with ranchers and farmers throughout eastern Montana over how we can best protect sage grouse habitats. And those conversations are being fueled by both state and federal money that allow farmers and ranchers in our agricultural community to move forward even while protecting environmental values. So the same conversations have gone on with our timber industry, and we've seen timber practices evolve over the last 50 years, and certainly there continue to be contentious battles over some timber harvest, but in many parts of the state, the local people, loggers and conservationists and Main Street have come together to find better ways to practice timber harvest and support conservation and environmental values. And I think all of those activities, all of that energy is fueled by our clean and healthful environment provision and the fact that rights are protected. We all feel we have this right, and we all have a duty as citizens to advance this constitutional guarantee. And so I'll close with saying I know the battles aren't going to stop. I'm hoping to be reelected, and some people say why, and I know if I am reelected, there will be plenty of fights on the floor of this House. We will continue to pass laws that are unconstitutional because the legislature will do what it will do, as Mike Malloy said yesterday. And no matter how much I wave my hands and say, well, that's unconstitutional, the majority will say, well, we've got the votes, and we'll let the court figure that out. And those battles will go on. But at the same time, these other efforts to bring Montanans together to work towards a common set of environmental values are going on every day too. And it's in that, those catalytic activities that we are continuing to work on finding the meaning of what a clean and healthful environment is. And I look forward to continuing to be a part of that, and I know many of the people here do too. I'm going to close with just one quick observation. And as I walked in this morning, the Senate chamber is full of young students. It's Girls State, and they're there. And I only wish that somehow we could have combined that gathering with this one, because one of the challenges that this generation that I'm looking at now has is communicating the stories that Dorothy told and others that I can tell, and the history of the Constitution and the history of our fight for a clean and healthful environment to the next generation and the generations thereafter. And I think if there's one step we can look forward to taking as we come out of this wonderful event, it's thinking about how we more broadly tell the story of what happened here 50 years ago and why it will be important to the next 50 years of Montana citizens. So thanks very much for your time this morning.
So good morning, and I want to say thank you so much to all of the delegates and all of those who helped create the 1972 Constitution. It is truly an amazing accomplishment, so incredibly forward-looking, and I just marvel at what you've done. So thank you, and I very much also appreciate being part of this panel. I am the fourth and final panelist, and my job is to talk about how businesses have implemented the clean and healthful provision of the Montana Constitution. And my perspective is going to be that of Northwestern Energy. I know that we're down to about 6 minutes of the program, but Richard has... I can get my full time, all right. But I do get to the point, you'll be pleased to know. So, before getting to the substance of my comments, there are two critical facts that, at least for me, frame this issue. The first is that Northwestern Energy is among the greenest utilities in the United States. That may surprise many of you, because that's not what is typically reported in the press. Right now, the average carbon emission, or let me put it differently, almost 40% of the energy generated by public utilities nationwide is carbon-free. That means, on average, nationwide, 60% emits carbon. And I'm happy to report that Northwestern Energy's statistics are much, much better, and we are way ahead of the rest of the nation. In 2020, 69% of our generation was carbon-free. That's an amazing statistic compared to the rest of the country. And while there will be fluctuations, because the water doesn't flow at the same rate every year, the wind doesn't blow the same every year, so there will be fluctuations. But as I said, in 2020, we were 69% carbon-free, and I think that represents or reflects our commitment to a sustainable environment and our commitment to Montana having a clean and healthful environment. And the second comment that informs me as I discuss this is the fact that energy is the foundation of everything. Where would we be without energy? We wouldn't have heating. We wouldn't have cooling. We wouldn't have ventilators. We wouldn't have light. What would we do? Energy is the foundation of everything. As a result, we have to have energy on a 24/7 basis. And in this regard, the Montana Constitution unquestionably guarantees a clean and healthful environment. But it goes on to also guarantee the right to pursue life's basic necessities. And you don't have life's basic necessities without energy. And these two guarantees are not only in the same section of the Montana Constitution, but they're right next to each other. They're in the same sentence. And so in the event of a conflict, the two have to be read together. And there has to be a reasonable balance reached between the two. So those are my two bookends, really, as to how I frame these issues and how I look at them. So now I'm going to turn to an extremely high level of Montana law and regulations regarding those that govern Northwestern Energy and the implementation of the clean and healthful environment. And I promise you, this is nothing like a law school lecture. Done with that. What I have done is I've looked at the statutes, I've looked at the regulations, I've distilled the obligations down to 3. There are more, but I've distilled it to 3, and these are the 3 I'm going to talk about. One is reliability. The second is energy has to be reasonably priced. And the third is we need to maintain a mix of environmentally responsible or sustainable energy sources. Okay? 3, reliability, reasonably priced, environmentally responsible. So we're going to start with reliability, and that is our core obligation as a public utility. When you turn your lights on, you expect them to go on. And if you go to the hospital and you're in the middle of a surgery, you don't expect the power to go out. And so it is our obligation to make sure our energy is reliable. And I'm happy to report that compared nationwide, we are either in the first or the second quartile in terms of reliability. And we're proud of that, especially because of the rural nature of our service territory. We actually have more poles than customers. But having said that, while and this is an important part, or an important fact, we have enough energy to serve our customers in Montana on an average day. We have more than enough energy. But at times of peak, and that means sustained periods of cold, sustained periods of heat, we don't own enough generation to serve our customers. So we have to go out into the market to get that energy. And what that means is we have to get energy from our neighboring utilities or from merchant generators. And there are 2 consequences of that. The first is it's going to be expensive. And the reason for that is during periods of prolonged cold or heat, our neighboring utilities usually are facing the same challenge. And because of the shutdown of fossil fuel plants nationwide, many utilities in the United States are short on meeting the ability to meet energy demands during peak times. And I will tell you that in the trade press over the past couple months in particular, every week there seems to be an article talking about expected brownouts this coming summer if there are long periods of very, very high heat, and that's the reason. So what is Northwestern Energy doing to solve this issue for our Montana customers? This is a serious problem. And the way we are solving it is we are going to be building a gas plant in Laurel. You may have read about it. And the reasons we are doing that are, number one, we have to meet peak demand. And unfortunately, wind and sun don't provide energy 24/7. So there has to be, at least on a transitional basis to a new environment, there has to be some fossil fuel energy. And the other main reason for the Laurel plant is to balance energy needs when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. So that's the extent of my comments on reliability. On reasonably priced, I have one sentence. I'm going to go on to what I think you really want me to talk about, which is sustainability and environmental responsibility. But on reasonably priced, Montana residential rates are below the nationwide average. In fact, right now, they're 13% below the nationwide average. So that's a fact you should be aware of. Now, I'm going to turn to maintaining an environmentally responsible portfolio. And as I said when I opened the comments, we're among the greenest utilities in the nation. In 2020, 42% of our energy was generated from hydro facilities and 27% by wind. And that, if I do my lawyer math right, that should be 69%. You can double check. You can check me on that. So where are we going in the future? I can imagine many of you might be thinking, 69% is great. I had no idea. But what are you doing now? What does the future look like? And here's what it looks like from our perspective. Number one, we're committed to what's called net zero 2050. And that means net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And you may be thinking, why 2050? Why are you waiting so long? And the answer is because the technology doesn't exist at this time that is cost effective for our customers. There isn't an energy source out there that allows us right now to go to net zero carbon. So as I said earlier, as a transitional measure, we're still going to require fossil fuels. But this is critical. We're not standing still, waiting for new technologies. We are investing in alternatives at what we call the speed of value. That is, we don't make big bets on untested technologies that could jeopardize our financial stability, could harm our customers or our shareholders or our stakeholders. We make small bets, we do pilot projects, and let me very quickly highlight just a few of them. Number one, we deployed a solar project in conjunction with the city of Bozeman, I think 5 years ago, and it powers 60 homes right now in Bozeman. Number two, we're working with 3 different cities, Bozeman, Missoula, and Helena, to help them achieve their green tariff goals. Number 3, we've invested in 4 different solar projects with high schools in Missoula to test different technologies. Number 4, we have what are called rural reliability projects. Back a few years ago, we tested a particular combination of solar and battery to see if it would provide good backup for the community, and it would help us avoid making much larger investments. And the technology worked. So we are taking the results of that project, and we are going to be deploying that in 30 to 40 different rural communities in Montana. The first community or area of the state where we're starting that is in Geraldine, and it will provide backup power for about 600 customers. Number 5, we are experimenting with different kinds of batteries. For example, one kind of battery that isn't talked about is called a supercapacitor, and it has a much greater temperature variation, or I should say it differently. It can accommodate much lower temperatures. So we've installed a supercapacitor in Yellowstone National Park, which we also serve, and it's been highly effective, and we're looking forward to implementing that kind of technology in other locations. In addition, other actions we're taking is we're electrifying our vehicles. We are installing EV chargers in this state. We have long-standing energy efficiency programs. We're improving our gas operations and addressing improved leak detection and the like. And finally, consistent with our commitment to sustainability, we have what I would say pretty remarkable avian protection programs. So with those comments, thank you very much for your time. And I hope that I hope I've been able to share with you some facts that I think are really important when it comes to Northwestern. And if you have any questions, I know you'll ask. Thank you again.
Thank you. We only have about 10 minutes left. I think that is a result of, number one, how interesting the presentations were, and number two, weak leadership on the part of the moderator, because I meant to reserve a little more time, so my apologies for that. I was going to follow the last panel's great example of opening up questions of clarification among panel members, but I think in the interest of time, I'd like to go straight to questions from the audience because I know we'll have some. I see one eager arm up already. It was up, I think, before I even stood up, so I'm going to call on you.
Thank you. This is so nostalgic for me. In the early 60s, I was a member of the State Board of Voters, and they used to send me to national conferences on water. This isn't specifically about clean and healthful environment. It's about water. And when I went to those conferences, I was worried. I'd come back and I'd say, do you know what they want to do? They say Montana has so few people and so much water. Why not take water from the Missouri River Basin and pipe it down where people really need it to the Colorado River Basin? It's so dry. And time after time, I'd come back and I report, they want to make a big dam in Montana and just ship our water down. And they said, you can sell it as a commodity. You used to have so few people, you have a lot of money. You know, it's richer than oil. And then in 1964, Congress passed a law which mandated a moratorium on all discussion, on all talk about inter-basin transfer of water. So you haven't heard much of it. And I know this isn't really clean and healthful, this is about water generally, but I want to ask the panel, nowadays with water a big subject again, do you think they're going to start talking about inter-basin transfer of water? they're really drier than ever in Colorado River Basin. But heck, we have over 1 million people now, and we have water rights in our Constitution. How is that going to be resolved? Or do you think the subject is never going to come up, that mandate on interbasin transfer of water is going to hold? Thank you.
Everybody's pointing fingers here. The index finger.
I appreciate that. One of my favorite things at the podium during session is to say DEQ is not the water quantity agency, albeit that's a whole sidestep of your question. We have talked about it recently, not as specifically as you identify it, but we have talked about whether the future of Montana's water position is Montana first and what drought and climate will transition us to. What must we do in order to provide for the citizens of state, and then downstream water calls. Right now, I know that we're also a flood control state, and we have dams in place on purpose in order to protect downstream states from the glut of water that's headed their way. So it's, again, it's like anything that we vigorously fight over. There is a balance of one side and the other. I think it's part of a future discussion, yes.
Yeah, Heather?
What I would say is, up until maybe yesterday, there were parts of Montana still subject to extreme drought. I look at the drought map that's updated every Thursday, because we've been in a drought in Montana, as everybody in this room knows, for some time. And so even though we've had this extraordinary flooding, which is devastating, the bottom line is we've been in a drought for years. So I don't know anything about water compacts, and I don't have a good crystal ball in response to your question about whether, Phoenix and Colorado are going to want the Missouri River from us up here. But I think the reality is, if you look at the drought map over the past couple years, it's really a non-starter. At least that's my hope.
And if I could, very quickly, I used to work on Missouri River issues with states all the way from Montana down to Missouri. And we lost lawsuits because Missouri wanted the water for its barges and its drinking water supplies. So we paid a price for being upstream, and we lost some of those battles. I changed jobs, and I was in litigation with the state of Wyoming, which was discharging lots of water from their coal bed methane operations. Montana lost that suit because we were downstream. And so it doesn't matter where I am. I don't do very well in these lawsuits, but people do want our water, I will give you that. Yes, Mr. Dow.
If I may, I think there's one other aspect that we haven't said too much about that I'd like to ask the panel about, and that's the impact of clean and healthful environment on standing. Standing in the legal profession means the right to have authority to bring a lawsuit, and that's pretty critical. Now, I thought, gee, in 1975, I was really ready to go, and especially on environmental matters. And I had made some contact with the state of Michigan and some of the legislators in Michigan, where they had passed a law that required standing for all citizens in the state of Michigan. I thought that was a great idea. We need that in Montana. And I introduced a bill, went through the legislature. I worked really hard. I got it through the Senate, got it through the House, and it went to the governor. I thought, wow, we've really done something here. Guess what? Governor Judge vetoed the bill. We didn't have guaranteed standing by legislation. But my question is, I kind of have a sense that maybe the Constitution did it for us, because the right to a clean and healthful environment is for everybody, and therefore everybody has standing to bring a lawsuit to challenge environmental degradation. Am I right about that? Is that your understanding as well?
Thank you, Senator Tao, for that question. And I think you're absolutely right that because of the fact that the delegates put a clean and healthful environment in the Constitution as an individual right, the Supreme Court in both of the big cases that have come up to it, standing has been argued, and the court has found that citizens of Montana need to cross a very, very low threshold in terms of the harm they might suffer from the state or private activity to invoke the constitutional provisions. I'll just quickly refer, I've said there are two cases, and they're important cases. They're now, after 50 years, there's a third case that's winding its way through the district courts, State v. Held or Held v. State, which involves school children suing the state over our energy policy, and their concern, their fear that climate change is going to decimate their future. And that's maybe at the further reaches of standing in terms of the harm that an individual will suffer. But that case, the district court had no problem in rejecting a motion to dismiss. And again, I think the constitutional guarantee to individual citizens of a clean and healthful environment, that right will protect almost everyone's ability to bring a lawsuit over environmental issues. Now, I just have to say, Director Dorrington may actually wish it were a little higher standard since he is the recipient of many of those suits, but I'm not worried about standing as an issue. I am worried about how we may treat our clean and healthful environment if there's a new constitutional convention. I'm worried about some of the other protections that we have in our Constitution. Standing does not keep me up at night.
Thank you for the question, Senator. Standing does keep me up at night. No, I wouldn't add too much to what Representative Francis said, other than to say some individual law within Montana do guarantee citizen supervision, and they have been executed mostly articulately and driven environmental protections from that standpoint. So that's the only thing I would add.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question, and it's yours. The floor is yours.
I'm Louise Cross's daughter, and what I was wondering about, I keep hearing things like potable water, we don't drink our neighbors' wastewater. There's other concepts that have come up today and yesterday, the non-degradation review, and then I start thinking about, well, what's going on with this tenorium, the technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radioactive material that we're drinking from the North Dakota oil fields. And I think about our potable water, and and I live now in New Mexico, but I still own some property here in Montana. And I think about this clean and healthful environment, and yet we're taking on wastewater that North Dakota won't keep in their own state. I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that.
Thank you for the question. So the question addresses the TNORM rules, which is deposition of radioactive containing material in, most of it is landfill, solid waste application. So the provision in landfill application process, this became live many years ago, not so long ago, but many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago in the eastern Montana area. So you have Yellowstone, I believe is the name of the landfill applicant or site, and the application of waste. At odds is the transportation of the radioactive material from and across state borders, and then application in a landfill in Montana. And I think, not having been a part of all of those conversations, discussions, I think even today we don't want to accept and degrade waters. We don't want to accept solid waste that would degrade the waters of the state for certain. That as a standing position, but then acknowledging that it's a relatively complex area of scientific review in which you'd say, how do you protect the deposition of the waste to do so? And that becomes then the science and the engineering in order to place those protections in a proposed landfill. It's complicated, and I don't believe at this point that we've approved that site and it's not in operation, but there is lively discussion yet today.
Thank you, Chris. Just in closing, I want to say a couple of things. I can't tell you what an honor it's been to have been asked, or maybe forced, by Mainan to moderate this panel. I'm really grateful, Mainan. Thank you for doing that. It's an honor to be surrounded by four such wonderful panelists. I think we did them a great injustice by not giving them each an hour to talk about their areas of expertise. We have a lot more to learn from all four of them. And it's an honor to be able to discuss a topic like this of such great importance to not just the Montana's past, but to its future. And I want to close on the note that the Constitution, the clean and healthful provision, doesn't just give Montana's government the responsibility, as Tom pointed out, of achieving a clean and healthful environment for the benefit of us and future generations. It bestows that responsibility on us as individuals. So please take that to heart and do your part to fight for Montana's environment. It's absolutely worth fighting for. Thank you so much for your time and your attention.